name is Catherine Miller Wilson. I'm the Executive Director of HIAS Pennsylvania. And I am thrilled to be welcoming you to our second information session in our series about the state of immigration in our country today. Tonight, our focus is on the harm that current policies are having on immigrant children, and I'm happy to be interviewing Pennsylvania's Immigrant Youth Program Manager, HIAS Pennsylvania's Immigrant Youth Program Manager, Stephanie Lubert. Some quick housekeeping. I'll ask my questions first to provide some critical background information, and then there'll be time for questions afterwards. My discussion with Stephanie will be recorded and will be shared after the program. I know folks are eager to get started, so let's begin. Welcome, Stephanie, and thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So let's just dive in. Tell us what immigration legal benefits, otherwise known as status, I think commonly we think of it as status, are available for immigrant kids.
Sure. There's a few types. Mostly what we're dealing with are humanitarian types of relief. So that's the main ways of immigration. You're going to see family-based, like if there's a family member, or employment. So we're going to be focusing on humanitarian. So that's asylum. We see a lot of asylum cases. That's for kids that either have been persecuted in their home country or have a well-founded fear of persecution if they go back, based on certain protected factors. So things that come up a lot would be race and nationality. So that would, for example, be like if we're working with Guatemalan families that are indigenous, they might be persecuted or at risk of harm because of being indigenous. Or membership in a particular social group, which is a term of legal art. And that's certain categories, things like sexual orientation, gender, lots of other things. You can get creative. Yes, so we see a lot of asylum cases, and we have to argue that the government is either unable or unwilling to protect the kids. Also, we see some T visas, so that's for trafficking. That can be trafficking in like sex trafficking or labor trafficking. I know sex trafficking gets a lot of media coverage, but really we usually are seeing more labor trafficking, being forced to work without pay or proper working conditions. U visas, we see some of that for crimes that are suffered here in the US. So if children arrive and then maybe they're victims of domestic violence, sexual assault within the home, they might qualify for a U visa. And then the main form of relief that we really focus on is something called special immigrant juvenile status. And this is a protection just for immigrant youth. You have to be under age 21. You have to prove that you've been abused, abandoned, and or neglected by one or both parent. And usually who's making that, or not usually, but who has to make that determination is the state court, because immigration judges are not equipped to make best interest determinations for children or apply state law on abuse, abandonment, neglect. So here in Pennsylvania, jurisdiction for state court ends at 18. So even though the benefit can be applied for up to age 21, we have to get either a custody order or a dependency order, making those special findings of abuse, abandonment, neglect. Yeah, and SIJ is kind of under attack right now too.
So, and just to clarify for our listeners, so SIJ was what Stephanie just described, special immigrant juvenile status, right? So, so yeah, why don't we just go there? You said it's under attack right now. What's happening? What's different about it from what happened before?
Yeah, you would think of all the things to attack that abused, abandoned, neglect, so protection for abused, abandoned, neglected kids would not be under attack, but nope, the administration came in hard against kids. So what we've been seeing really is, so the special immigrant juvenile status, what we call, but it's more of like a classification. And once that's approved, it allows the child to get in this theoretical line for a green card, just to be able to apply for a green card. And I remember when I first started doing this work like 10 years ago, we'd see the case beginning to end, 6 months, send the kid off with a green card. But as time has gone on, more and more kids are being screened, applying for this special relief, and it's getting backlogged. Also just, ineffective, I don't know, just the government. So things are backlogged, lack of visas, supply and demand. Now, I would say the backlog, I mean, it's hard to estimate, but I would say it's maybe like a 7+ year wait. So it could be decided that you are abused, abandoned, neglected child. It is not in your best interest to return to your home country because no one is there to provide care and support for you. But you're gonna have to sit in the US without any status for years and years and years. And you're at risk of deportation. So back in 2022, through some national advocacy by a bunch of immigrant youth advocates, something called Deferred Action was put in place for these kids that were granted SIJ status. And Deferred Action was a protection from deportation, and it allowed them to apply for a work permit and social security number. And so this was a really big deal for the older youth. Also, if you're sitting in like a 7+ year backlog, you might have started as a youth, but now you're a young adult and need to work. So this is great. It gave the youth ability to get a photo ID, a government issued photo ID, to work, to help them save money, especially when they're looking at higher education past high school. It was great. And Deferred Action is still on the books, but in practice, it is pretty much dead. So we're seeing approvals of SIJ applications without the Deferred Action grant. We're seeing those that previously had Deferred Action, the government issuing letters saying that that Deferred Action has been taken away. And as we've seen with some of our own clients that have been deported, who had Deferred Action, it's definitely not a protection from deportation anymore. And so that's a really big blow to the immigrant youth.
And didn't it also result in taking away the work authorization?
Yes, those that have their work authorization already, I guess they can use it until it expires. TBD, this is all like developing, so time will tell. But yes, we're starting to get approvals where they can't even apply for the work authorization, and it's really upsetting to hear. It's hard for the youth to plan, especially if you're in high school and you're trying to just be a regular kid, and you want to work your way through, because the youth that we work with aren't eligible for federal student loans and a lot of federal financial aid that comes through the FAFSA. So most of them, if they want to go to college, they have to work their way. They have to seek like private scholarships, which are kind of hard to get, or really they're just working their way. And if they can't legally work, that really stunts them.
You no longer have deferred action, which means you are deportable while you're waiting for status, even though there has been a finding that you were abused, neglected, abandoned, and it is not in your best interests to be deported to your home country, and you will lose your work authorization so that you have no way to support yourself. And there you are. So let's back up a step. Let's talk about who these kids are. And I guess before you answer that question, just so our audience knows a little bit about your history with this population, how long have you been doing this work?
I've been with HIAS Pennsylvania since April of 2015. So I just recently celebrated my 10-year anniversary.
Woo! Big milestone. So 10
Yeah.
years of representing immigrant kids, right?
Yeah, or the whole time working with immigrant kids. I started as an equal Equal Justice Works Justice AmeriCorps Fellow. It's a mouthful, but it was a special fellowship program, but partnership between AmeriCorps and the Department of Justice, which houses the Immigration Court. And it was in response, the program began in 2014 in response to the surge of unaccompanied minors coming across the southern border.
So tell us, what are some of the reasons why the kids come to the US by themselves?
Yeah, all types of reasons, and even the reasons themselves have kind of changed over the years. But a few things hold true. We're seeing violence. When I first started, it was primarily gang violence coming out of what we call the Northern Triangle: El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras. Now that's expanded. We're seeing gang violence in like Haiti, Ecuador, um, other countries are coming because of gang violence. There's also violence within the home, child abuse. Certain countries, children just don't have rights and protections like they do here. Political unrest. Yeah, I mean, you could just take a look at the news, kind of guess the countries. Yeah, political unrest, wherever that might be. Sometimes family reunification. You have kids that their parents have come to the U.S. for their own safety, perhaps, or for their own reasons, and they're left with aging grandparents, and maybe the grandparents pass away, or they get so ill they can't care for the children. Um, and they're just forced to come reunify with their family. And then we're also seeing an increase in economic necessity. Economic necessity has always been there, but we're seeing an increase in that, sadly, because of climate change. And our laws have not, like our asylum, refugee, like protection laws, have not adapted to recognize economic refugees as a protected reason why someone might try and like seek a better life, seek protection in the US. But yeah, we're seeing villages ravaged by natural disasters, mudslides, earthquakes, hurricanes, agrarian societies upended due to climate change. And if people can't grow food, or if that's like their sole income, I mean, things become pretty desperate.
So it's interesting. I mean, it's terrible and tragic, but I also think it's a great illustration of something that is generally true, whether you're a child or an adult, that um, the question of undocumented immigrants is because of this issue of there's no pathway, right? And the victims of climate change are perfect examples of that, because it doesn't meet that definition, and there isn't really a humanitarian benefit unless there's one of these other grounds. Um, Great. So what happens to immigrant youth when they're apprehended at the border? And I guess it's maybe a two-part, like maybe what usually happened in the last 10 years, and then maybe what is happening today. So, yeah.
Sure. And I'll focus this on unaccompanied children, because there are children that do come with families. That's a different situation. We're going to focus on the unaccompanied children because that's the majority of um, my work, and also they're the most vulnerable. So if a child comes across the border unaccompanied, so that just means they're not with a parent or guardian and they're under age 18. They're apprehended and they're transferred over to the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Now, you hear the name refugee and you're like, what? Why are they going there? They are not refugees. It's just random. Someone down the line in the federal government decided that the Office of Refugee Resettlement was best situated to care for children. I don't know, true or false, but whatever, that's where they go. So they go to this ORR shelter. It's essentially youth detention. It looks different than adult detention in the sense that it's more of like a group home shelter, and they call them shelters, but it's detention. Um, while they're there, they get pretty good care. And so there's a few shelters in the state of Pennsylvania that we service, and help represent and do know your rights for those children. So basically when they're in OR care, the government contracts with local legal service providers to do know your rights presentations, legal screenings, things like that for the kids. And then the shelter staff, the OR staff, are working to identify a sponsor. And so what a sponsor is, it could be a parent. Maybe there's a parent already in the US or a family member or a legal guardian already in the US. And so they look to identify who that might be, do some background checks, and vet those sponsors, and with the ultimate goal of releasing the children to the sponsor to then continue their immigration case outside of detention. Now, what's happening? What's happening
Okay.
now? um, well, what's happening now is we've seen a real steep decline in the number of kids coming just because of border enforcement. It doesn't mean that people still aren't desperate and trying to seek safety. It just means they're having trouble doing so. But the children that do get across, they're still going into OR custody. Now, whether we're able to go out and provide know your rights presentations and legal screenings, that's been in flux. It's been kind of whiplash, like back and forth, back and forth, back and forth with funding and lawsuits and injunctions and this and that. Also, one change is basically now ORR will not release children to undocumented sponsors. So what was really common is one parent or one caregiver would be here in the US as the sponsor. Most of the time they're undocumented and the kids would get released. It went from, oh, the sponsors have to submit to fingerprints and all these background checks. And then there was info sharing of the sponsors and the undocumented sponsors' information with ICE. Kids would get released to the sponsor, and then ICE would swoop in and just like detain the sponsor. And then you're like, well, what was the point of that? But now the sponsors just simply cannot come forward. So we're seeing kids that I think we have less than 20. We have less than 20 kids sitting in our shelter, not our shelter, but the shelter we service right now. And they've been there for a really long time because basically they can't be released. Their sponsors are undocumented and they're just sitting in the shelters.
And what are they allowed, for example, to go outside of the shelter, to go to school or to go shopping or?
Nope. They have school. I use school loosely. They have school at the shelter. It's not real school. It's more like maybe English classes. They do art. They're not, no, they can't go to like school in the shelter and then like integrate into like a regular school and like not be behind. It's not real school. So they're not in school. They're not able to go shopping. They're not going on like field trips. I mean, they're not like confined to a cell. I mean, like I said, it's like a group home. They go to their classes, they go to like cafeteria, they can go outside and like play soccer and things like that. They show them, like Disney movies and things. They like paint their nails or whatever. But like they're stuck there. They can't do normal kid things.
Okay, so that's pretty distressing. So the shelters are part of a program that was created a while ago by the federal government called the Unaccompanied Minors Program. Is that right?
Correct.
So tell us more about that. If you know, when was it created, approximately when, and what was the purpose? What's the status of it now?
Yeah, I don't know dates.
That's fine, no problem.
Don't quote me on dates. But basically, the Unaccompanied Children program was created because of to deal with kids in OR custody. And so the purpose of that program, through, I believe the protections come through the TVPRA, which is federal, which stands for Trafficking Victims.
Victim Protection and Something Act.
RR, yeah. Yeah, yeah, Google it. So the TVPRA is where most of the protections come from. And then there's been some settlement agreements and lawsuits and case law over the years. that kind of define like what the parameters of the protections are. So basically the protections through the unaccompanied children program are, like I mentioned before, know your rights trainings when the kids first arrive at the Office of Refugee Resettlement shelter, at the OR shelter. They get know your rights presentations, letting them know what their rights are, what their legal relief options are, what their rights are within the shelter, what their rights are within the US, all that good stuff, in a age appropriate way, in a language that they understand. They're given a legal screening, so that's what our staff is doing, providing the Know Your Rights trainings, doing the legal screenings to see what type of immigration relief protection they might qualify for. And then for sometimes while they're in the shelter, they have immigration court because all these kids are in removal proceedings. So they might have immigration court. So we would represent them during their immigration court proceedings. Once they're released, so this program allowed for direct representation. And so we had signed up to represent youth that were released from the shelter to a specific geozone in Pennsylvania, and we would provide them with direct representation and follow them to basically the end of the case. So the kids could be with us for many years because these cases are really slow. And when that was cut, I don't know, like the first cut, I think, was March. There was a stop work order for like 4 days, and then they were like, just kidding. And then there was like a termination for like a few weeks. And then they were like, oh, okay, well, we got sued now. Just the Know Your Rights is back. And then they got sued a little bit more, and they're like, okay, uh direct legal services are back, but like only till the end of September. So it's an ongoing saga. It's not resolved, but um basically children's ability to have access to free immigration attorneys is in real jeopardy.
And so just to be clear, without the federal immigration unaccompanied minors program, there is no right to a free lawyer for immigrant kids. Is that correct?
Correct. This isn't like criminal court where you're guaranteed a lawyer, and if you can't afford one, one's appointed for you. Nope. If you want a lawyer, you have to pay for one and find one yourself. And there's some disturbing statistics. Don't quote me on the numbers, but it's something like um, kids that are unrepresented that don't have an attorney, 90% of them receive removal orders, like are deported, and those that do have attorneys, 75% are granted relief. So you can just see, I mean, the numbers aren't exact. Again, Google it. You can find the facts out there. But yeah, it's this really stark comparison of like there's really like no hope if they aren't represented, and like how many kids do qualify for relief once they have access to a lawyer.
Yeah. And I remember you telling me a story, Stephanie, actually a long time ago when you had first started. Um, you you had the kids draw their story about why they came to the United States. And I asked you, like, why? I mean, are kids all artists? Why did you do this? And you explained to me that because when you ask them just the simple question, why did you come? They give answers that are clearly what they think you want to hear. But if you tell them, draw me a picture of why you came, the pictures tell these horror stories that are nothing like the answers that they gave you, right?
Yeah. It was a strategy I adopted early on, particularly for the younger kids, that many of them like don't have the language, like just the words, because they're kids, they're young. They don't have the words, the language in any language to express what they've gone through. They're really scared. Kids are really like they can be influenced easily. So if they have someone in their ear, or they're like seeing in social media or hearing in the community, like, oh, you need to say this or do that, they can be easily coached, and um, it's hard, and it's hard to get kids to open up. And so a lot of them do, and they're not all artists, but a lot of them do enjoy drawing. And I noticed I started to have success, and it was a casual way to kind of sit down in my office, and have them draw and make it like not a scary legal meeting. Or kids like homework. I don't know if kids like homework, but they respond to homework. They understand the concept of homework. And so I could say, you know what, your homework is like, go home and like do a drawing for this prompt. And like, here's your due date. And they would come back with these kind of like comic book style, um, like graphic novels in a way about their experience. And it was a way to begin a conversation, like a more deeper, real conversation about what they're experiencing and going through.
Yeah, and I feel like I remember, I mean, I might be confusing, but I remember one kid, you asked him, oh, why'd you come here? And he said, I love the USA.
Yeah.
And then you gave him that assignment, just draw me a picture of why you came. And the picture was a kid standing over another kid with a knife dripping blood, like he'd clearly stabbed
Hmm.
the kid, and he was like hiding in the background. And when you asked him, what is this? He said, I saw my friend murdered.
Hmm.
And so then they,
Yeah, I think he was trying to like act tough, and he's like, I'm not afraid of anything. I'm not afraid to go back, nothing. And then he like drew this picture. I think we actually got his permission. He was granted asylum. We got his permission, and they were published in the Philadelphia Inquirer, at one point. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, so now we're going to fast forward to the present. So can undocumented youth get arrested by ICE?
Yeah.
I mean, we know
Yeah.
undocumented adults can. What about kids? Is there any special exception for them?
Yeah. So I don't know. Yes, I would say yes, but so far what we've seen is if you're under 18, so far not a priority for ICE, at least locally here and what we've seen. Stories are starting to pop up across the country, so it's hard to say like what's going on. But I would say if you're under 18, you're probably okay. But those youth, once they turn 18, are at risk. And I recently just had a 19-year-old who had special immigrant juvenile status, who had that deferred action, which was supposed to be protection from deportation, who was picked up and deported. And right,
Hmm.
you're like, oh, 19, they're an adult, but it's 19. They're not. And like that's like the simplified version, right? The story is like more complex than that. But yes, yeah, we have been seeing kids get picked up.
Yeah, and just a public service announcement, because my husband did juvenile law work for many years, not necessarily with immigrants. And one of the things that he taught me was all the research that he and Juvenile Law Center did that shows that adolescent brains are not fully formed until 26. So that 19-year-old, we treat him like an adult, but he's getting deported and he's fearful, he's impulsive, he doesn't have any of the adult tools to deal
Yeah.
with those kinds of stressors. So,
And as someone who was who had granted special immigrant juvenile status, that means a Pennsylvania judge had decided that he'd been abused, abandoned, or he was actually in the child welfare system. So he was really dependent and had no one. So it's just sad to see that designation had been granted, and that it was not in his best interest to return to his country because no one was there to care for him, and yet he was like still deported, and he'd been in the US for a few years. So it's just, a lot of questions about what support system, if any, he's going back to.
mm. um, so now we know that we know, of course, we've been seeing it in the news that adults, including parents, can be deported. What happens with parents of American children? Do they have any hope of remaining, or what happens to the kids?
Yeah. So there's two options. Either the kids get left behind or the kids go the kids go with. And for those that are left behind, arrangements need to be, ICE doesn't care. ICE isn't like, oh no, you have kids, we'll like wait to deport you so you can like figure out. No. They just deport you and the kids are there and you have to have a plan figured out ahead of time. If you choose to bring your kids with you, typically they just deport you, and then whoever, like the kids, whoever is here in the US, they make arrangements to fly the kids, the US citizen kids, to you in your country. I know some media reports have been going around about US citizen children getting deported. I don't know a lot of facts about that, but from what I can tell, it seems like they're using the word deported because the parents didn't give consent. It wasn't, the parents didn't say, I am choosing to bring my US citizen children back to my country with me. ICE just made that decision for them. And so that is a change. That's something new.
Okay. So, what about, can immigrant youth be adopted or placed in foster care? Like as a
Yes.
way to kind of address their vulnerability?
I don't know as a way to address, but yes, they're definitely in foster care. We see it. We see it all the time. We have a great relationship with the Philadelphia Department of Human Services, and we're kind of the on-call immigration attorneys for any immigrant youth that end up in the child welfare system. Um, Now, how they end up there, it's a variety of reasons, but usually some child line report has been made about some abuse or truancy or something. Something's gone down. So it's not, kids don't go into the child welfare system because it might provide a path to legal immigration status. They end up in the system because of the regular reasons kids might end up, any kid might end up in the system. And then if they are undocumented, that's just like an extra challenge. But I've had immigrant youth that I've worked with that are placed with great foster families that ultimately end up adopting them. So they are adoptable. It is great. We love to see like a happy story. Most of the time, it doesn't affect their immigration status in certain scenarios. So if a kid has their green card already through however they get that, and they're adopted before they turn 16 by a US citizen, then they can derive US citizenship faster. But that, I think I've only done that like once, for the most part. It doesn't, the adoption doesn't really affect their immigration status, but it's great to give them a stable permanent home.
So, I just want to focus on that one statement you just made. Adoption doesn't affect their immigration status. So if a family adopted an undocumented child, they can't then file a family-based petition to get the child
No, so they
status?
would, no, so what usually happens, like those kids seem ripe for special immigrant juvenile status because they've been abandoned. They've clearly been abandoned by bio parents, if they're in the child welfare system, or being fostered by another family. So typically, again, there's all types of scenarios, but I would say like typically we would see a kid apply for special immigrant juvenile status, get their green card through that path, which is really, really long backlogs. And then once they have their green card, the only thing the adoption might do is just shorten the time it takes to then do that final step of citizenship.
Okay.
So yes, we actually have some foster parents that are fostering kids, and those kids are like just don't have a lot of relief available to them, and so it's been a struggle, because they're trying to help them. They desperately want to help them get status, and it's difficult to learn that, yeah, it doesn't, yeah, the adoptive parent status doesn't much matter or help.
Got it. Um, so what role do schools play in supporting immigrant kids?
Yeah, a lot, because most kids, or all kids, they should, unless they're being truant, all kids pass through schools. So teachers and school staff are going to have it's the greatest kind of common denominator and point of contact for immigrant youth. And so um, teachers have and school staff have a lot of power in how these immigrant youth kind of um, acclimate, assimilate, like adjust to life here in the US through uh, English classes, whether, you know, like the teacher and school staff make a welcoming classroom and school, um, you know, how they address any bullying, things like that. So the school, it's also like a kind of a trusted institution and place of support for the families as well.
Great. And can immigrant kids, are they allowed to go to public schools, or do they need to have status? Mhm.
Yeah, so thanks to the 1982 Supreme Court ruling in Plyler, Plyler v. Doe, basically ruled that um, all all youth, regardless of their immigration status, have a right to. It's basically a K through 12 education, public schools. So yes, undocumented youth. Are allowed to go to public school or that's protected up until the 12th grade.
That's great. Um, so some of this you touched on already, but what are some of the challenges that immigrant kids typically face in school?
Yeah, so language, we hear that all the time. Kids not being engaged with school, don't like going to school because they don't understand anything or it's too hard. They're not getting the appropriate language support, which I know is difficult on the schools as well, especially like the public schools and limited resources. But language is a really big deal. Bullying, especially during national rhetoric, that trickles down, like what adults are saying trickles down to the kids. And so if there's hate-filled speech in the home, or they're hearing hate-filled speech in the news and media or social media, whatever they're consuming, they might act that out in school. And so we'll see a lot of our immigrant youth facing a lot of bullying and in school violence, which is really difficult. Yeah, it's really sad because our kids are already like scared and traumatized enough, and it's just another challenge that they have to overcome.
Okay. Are schools required to report a student's immigration status?
No, they're not. They're not even really supposed to ask about immigration status to even register the school with the school. But if that information does come up, no, under the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. That's a federal law that governs educational records and privacy. So, as a general rule, schools can't release personal information in a student's education record, and that includes immigration status, without written consent from the parent or guardian, or if you're 18 already, an adult student themselves.
And that's the act that you just mentioned is known as FERPA, right?
FERPA, yeah, FERPA.
So in case any of you in our audience hear that acronym, you know what it is. So is ICE allowed to come into schools?
Yeah, it's a complex question. So, uh, prior prior to this administration, there was a sensitive locations policy. It wasn't a law; it was just policy. Um, Best practices. ICE just shouldn't, for bad PR reasons, go into schools, places of worship, hospitals, things like that. That policy is gone, but it doesn't mean that it was then suddenly a free for all of ICE showing up at schools. There's other ways to snag people. Um, we so while we haven't really seen ICE showing up in schools, it doesn't mean that they won't in the future.
Okay. So victim number 3 to the current policy is the ICE out of schools um, policy. What should teachers and staff members do if ICE shows up at a school?
Yeah, this is a really good question. And we've been trying to do a lot of training, like here with the Philadelphia School District on this. And I know the school district has a policy. Um, so basically, if ICE shows up, it's important to ICE is allowed to come into like any public space. So like if your waiting area or the lobby of the school is public, ICE can come into the public space. ICE cannot go into private spaces. Those are protected. So if just a regular rando off the street couldn't just like barge in and come into a classroom, then ICE can't do that either. But ICE can come in and wait in the lobby. And so we're trying to get the message out and train school staff that they should have ICE wait in the lobby. They should make copies of any papers, badges, IDs that ICE has. Basically, ICE needs a properly executed judicial signed search warrant to be able to go into these private, more secure places like the classrooms, or to like conduct searches, access school student records, things like that. ICE loves to just wave around random pieces of paper that or warrants that are like insufficiently executed, and even attorneys that are trained in this have to kind of look closely. So we definitely don't want teachers and school staff to be analyzing legal documents. And so the best policy is to just take copies of whatever ICE has and pass that off to the superintendent, or your school's like general counsel, or the district's general counsel, whatever that policy may be. And it's good to make sure that everyone is trained on that, like the front desk staff, the officers that are like at the front at this security check in the schools, making sure everyone top bottom is trained so that they know what to do if they encounter ICE.
Great. All right. I have lots more questions, but I see questions have come up in the chat. In our last 12 minutes, let's turn to our audience. And I think we're going to turn the recording off now.